You are listening to another podcast series by the Sacred Art of Living community, honoring soul-sized questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daryl Williams, your host for this podcast series called Soul-Sized Questions. Spiritual director Jack Kennedy explores the distinction from the spiritual exercises between whether we believe that we are part of God's plan versus participants in a divine project. In the Ignatian tradition, it is a relief to discover that we are being created in each moment and that our deepest hopes should be the anchor of how we make important decisions.
I've known from ever since I studied the Baltimore Catechism, and I grew up with the Baltimore Catechism, that I was created by God. I understood that to mean back there somewhere. That God had created me, wanted to create me. But that is not what this phrase means in the theology of discernment. It doesn't mean that our creation is limited by time and space at our conception. It doesn't mean that God at some primordial start created me, that it's just an event in the past, but it does mean God is constantly making me and making us at each moment. Now, maybe that's not a revelation to you, but for me to really sit with that still brings me into amazement. What goes on in you when you hear that right now? Skepticism, just one word, a feeling word. Responsible lays a trip on you, right? Oh my God, what a burden. I do want to address that. It's just a job, okay. Other words? Hopeful? Longing? Cool. Possibility. Pardon me? Comforted. Unfinished. Relational. Movement. Potential. Cared for. This really opens up. I mean, I've said this stuff for years, and every time I say it again, I get in touch with, if I really trust this, there's something so exciting about life. There's always, and it quotes, a new beginning. It's not just a beginning, but there's more. The statement, human beings are created, can mean a statement of a truth, or it can be a directive toward your experience. Now, it's both of those. But very seldom do we look at it as a directive to look at your own experience. How are you being created right now? Have you come more fully into yourself since last night? Are you more fully yourself? Are you coming to a deeper grasp of all that you are and all that you potentially can be that's already there in you in some way? Just in your longing. I think that if a bulb of a daffodil could reflect on itself, it's full of longing, just to become what it already is in potential already. And I think that's true of us. If we honor what's going on right in the dirt and the mud of our being that nurtures us. As we'll see later, Rumi talked about, that we want to be a reed planted in the mud of God in some way. So here is a quote. This is from Tetlow, who you saw on the film, and this is his translation of the spiritual exercises. We are being created momently by our God in all concrete particulars, and we are listening to God's summons into life. We are being summoned into life right now, according to this theology, when we let ourselves hear our most authentic desires, which rise out of God's passionate, creative love in us. God dreams in me. So it invites us to consider a shift, if we haven't made this shift in our own spirituality and our own theology, and it's a shift from God's plan, the blueprint model, to God's project, which was some of the language that was used in the video you watched. The blueprint model, which I grew up with, said God's plan for me, God's will is out there somewhere. God has it all figured out from all eternity, what God wants me to do, and there's like a roadmap somewhere. If I could just find it. If I could find the roadmap in some way. And for me, my experience of the blueprint model is God playing, I've got a secret. I'll give you 10 guesses. Under which shell is the pea? Oops, wasn't there. Looked like it, doesn't it? I don't like that kind of God. I don't want to have anything to do with a God who might be manipulative in that fashion, who likes to play tricks. Gee, I thought you wanted me to, I thought you called me into this marriage, and here I'm faced with divorce. Or I chose it because it was destructive as hell. Where were you in all that? I thought I was following and listening to you. I mean, you can name anything in your life. And actually, I want to ask you to think of any experience you have had or experience you're having now of trying to sort out, where's God in all this stuff? You know, what am I called to do here? This is a dilemma. What do I choose? There's 20 good things. Does God care which one? Or there's some stuff that's really hard here, and yet I think maybe I'm called to that. Am I doing that just out of guilt? Or is God creating the guilt that I'm feeling that makes me stay with this when I know it's not healthy? Where's God in this? I want you to be thinking about, can you name in your own experience a struggle with that to see if some of the things I share, especially this afternoon when I go into consolation and desolation specifically, for you to be able to say, oh, that sheds some light on my experience. So, if there is God's plan, that's a reality from all eternity. You know, it's like an architect's blueprint. So what do I get to do? I get to believe there is one. I get to try to figure out how that's happening in my life. And I notice that when I do direction with a lot of folks, and actually as someone who, as a priest, listened a lot in confessions, because I grew up in a church where there was a lot of people coming for the individual in quote, sacrament of reconciliation. There's a lot of disappointment if I see the blueprint model is operative because it ain't working, or a lot of anger, or a lot of guilt, or a lot of confusion, or a lot of fear, or a lot of rigidity, or a lot of God's irrelevant. I've tried to live this and it doesn't work. I've seen, especially in Roman Catholicism, people who thought the way we did it the last 400 years is the only way you can do it. That's what God communicated to us. There's only one way to do everything out of fear and rigidity. As soon as Vatican II came along, said, wait a minute. You're destroying what God has called us to. Couldn't let go of that to see maybe the Spirit is working now in some way, in some ongoing way. So then we're supposed to freely conform ourselves to the plan. You know, that what comes to me is that statement that some people, blessed are the poor. I mean, I understand what that means in the Beatitudes, but we hear it often in human, well, the poor you're always going to have with us. That's not a statement that says, hey, that's just the way it is. That's a judgment against us. You know, we're always going to have the poor with us. Why? Because you haven't discerned in your own spirits what it is you need to do about that. And maybe that's something that's really important in what life is all about. What is it all about, Alfie, have something to do with feeding the hungry? I don't know, but I'm asking that question. So it's, as you know, it goes to hunger for me. I'm going to use that example. It'll come up without my even reflecting on it. So if we move and shift to what this theology of discernment is inviting us into, a kind of understanding is God's project. That God's involved with us now. It's co-creative. It's a collaborative model. It's a concrete event on what I'm working on right now. It needs adjustments and improvisations because it didn't quite work this way and it's going that way and I'm paying attention to some other needs over here. A project is an ongoing activity which requires improvisation and adjustment. To me, the image that comes up is the Hebrew image of the potter's wheel, the clay. You know, you don't just create a pot. I've sat at a potter's wheel, and it was very difficult. I could never even get it on center. I just couldn't do it. But what I started to realize is that I'm like that lump of clay, and as it gets formed, it takes time and it takes loving hands. And that hand, even when what's painful sometimes is for the clay. I'm sure if the clay could feel it, and I'm pushing on it this way, that'd be kind of painful. And yet it's starting to shape me into something more fully what I can become in the form of what's shaped out of the clay. So it's ongoing. I'm still being shaped and molded. How much do I allow that to happen in my life? By what comes up? Can I find God even in the hard things that's still shaping me by the way I respond out of love in some way? So project is co-creative. God breaks into our experience, our inner subjectivity, our interiority, and our affectivity. And God takes our inner subjectivity much more importantly than we do. Because we're being shaped by what we're experiencing, how we choose to act out of that in some way. I want to spend a little bit more time on the plan model as opposed to the project model. In the plan model, everything was created out of nothing. God created everything out of nothing. And we know from Genesis, the world was not created out of nothing. God created a world out of chaos. So the project model is creation from chaos. Now, I can't imagine that there's anybody in this room that cannot at least think of one time in their life when things were chaotic. You can relate to that word. It's the human condition, the human experience. It's the biblical image is a dark, turbulent ocean. And I think I said this last time. You're got your college degree, you got $5,000 in your pocket. You've got your jewelry, you've got everything, and you're in a little rowboat, and there's 40-foot waves, and you feel like you're going to drown. And you say, how did I even get here? I know one person, when I used that image later, said to me, well, weren't you stupid? How'd you get in a rowboat? And I'm going, I don't know. I'm here, and that's what it feels like. Whether I chose it or didn't, that's the experience of my human condition. I'm kind of stuck with that. It feels that way sometimes in my life. Chaos is a concreteness we all experience. So God is creating each one of us out of the chaos of our life world, out of our own chaotic and blessed history. You have a chaotic history and you have a blessed history. And it might be even worth it sometime just to draw a line. I hate doing things linearly, but just starting to name where has the chaos been? Where's the grace been? And when I look back, where are those moments in some way? God draws us out of our madnesses and our craziness of our own families, companionships, nations. It's coming up on Christmas time and Thanksgiving. What I end up sitting with a lot of people in spiritual direction is they're going home for Christmas because of all the stuff that gets stirred up around that in different ways, good or bad, family issues. God creates the authentic person I am becoming out of a possible wounding from my family of origin, out of the disorders I have introjected from my culture. I have taken on what it means to be a man in this culture. And I've struggled with that. I don't think I mentioned this before. I can never remember. Again, like Richard, we come out of our own experience. Did I tell you about my desire for a Jeep Cherokee? I'm afraid to use that because it might judge anybody else. It's just, I have this image that I'm not going to find a partner unless I got a Jeep Cherokee. And I made a joke out of it, but then I said to the people I live with, you know what? I think I mean that. Because I had to deal with my feelings of driving my 83 Mustang around. I did. I thought it was silly. I'm almost 60 years old, and here I am having this experience. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I'm going, wow, it's what I experienced, so that's what I get to discern out of. Where am I unfree? What's this saying about my own image of myself? Well, how does God see me? Does God picture me in a Grand Cherokee? I don't think God gives two shitskis, pardon my language. I don't. Yeah, thank you. So that's a disorder. I mean, for men we're confronted by a society that says who we are. Women are too. I mean, there's a whole bunch to talk about around that. But the idea is, out of that, God is working in me if I'm going to listen. God's laboring in me to let myself be fully shaped by. Am I going to be shaped by advertising? Or am I going to be shaped by my own inherent value? I was faced with that one little tiny incident that's not so little, because I could let myself be shaped by that. And I still might. I don't know. Out of my deliberately, not so deliberately chosen self-destructiveness, compulsions, and addictive habits. I'm a 9. I don't want to be standing up here. If there were a cot here, I'd be a little more comfortable. There's things in me that I'm addicted to. I need to work. I have to make choices, not just to let that to gravity. Gravity really appeals to a 9. It just does. And I've got to be able to stand and say, wait a minute, what is my inherent value? How does God see me? Can I let go of anything in my life that keeps me from experiencing myself the way God experiences me? A loved human being.
Jack Kennedy is a special mentor to the Sacred Art of Living Center. If you would like to hear more of his wisdom on this subject, consider participating in one of our online 30-day retreat experiences. You can join others from your own home and at your own pace to benefit from the art of discernment in your everyday life. Go to our website, sacredartofliving.org, to learn more about these virtual retreat programs.